Hello, everyone. Gordon Causey coming to you, as is typically the case, live and unscripted. Today is January 31st, Friday, January 31st, and it's just after 9 p.m., 9:15, 9:16, right around there. Pretty much bang on time when I wanted to start. Candy, because she loves her treats, is now coming in exactly when I call. If I let her out in the backyard there, she's quick to return. She's already, and I have to give her a treat or else I don't get any peace. So come on, shake a paw, shake. Lay down, speak, speak. All right, come on up. There she is, Candy the Wonder Pup. And thank you for tuning in. Last night's live stream got a lot of engagement, more than is the norm for my, as I like to call it, my miserable, pathetic little YouTube channel. I know some say it's not miserable, pathetic. And what I mean by that is that there's no production value, no professional lighting, no mic, no headphones, just bare bones, basic, simple guy. And I hope that it speaks to a level of authenticity. I'm not playing a character, as it were. And I find so many in the social media space, YouTubers, that they kind of put on a mask. I got to put on my YouTube face now. And I try to come across as genuinely as I possibly can. With that being said, I do recognize that the way I talk on YouTube is probably not exactly the same way that I talk when I'm in person. I've got someone writing, "Hey, long time no see." Let's see what the user is. 986STE. I'll just say 986. Yeah, all the way since yesterday when I did my last video. And that one went on for, I think, an hour and 45 minutes and the reason for that is because the content was so engaging. And when the content when the interaction, when the live chat is being filled up and there's discussion going on, it animates me. I tend to have opinions on a wide varying range of subjects. And I've got to say, my internal dialogue, the wheels are grinding in my head 100 miles an hour now because there is just so much going on. And I kind of want to touch on everything. But you can't do it. There's just too much happening right now. And of course, the big news that's dominating things right now is about what happened at 6:30 p.m. roughly this evening in, I guess it's northeast Philadelphia, where a small plane, is the way it was initially reported, a small plane crashed into a residential neighborhood. I think it's hit maybe a shopping mall, maybe some homes. Got a few more details within the last 15 minutes, seeing one of these news feeds from a local Philadelphia news source that was updating regularly as items became available. And what they're saying right now is that it was a Learjet 55. I have no idea. When I hear of a Learjet, I have a mental image in my mind of what that looks like: sleek, something that the rich and famous fly on. But when I hear small plane, what I tend to think of is something like a Cessna. So, something that'll seat 4 or 5 passengers and the pilot. Likewise, there seems to be some conflicting information. It's early stages, 3-4 hours old, the news. So things are coming out and everyone rushes to get their content out, so they don't always ensure that they have everything 100% accurate, nailed down. But there have been conflicting reports about 6 people on board and 2 people on board. I'm tending to think there were probably more than 2. And there was an indication about the possibility of a patient being on board, that this was something of a medical flight to take someone, and the plane was apparently outbound from Philadelphia heading for Missouri. I forget the name of the exact location within Missouri, but it was outbound to Missouri. And maybe there was someone was flying to Missouri to a medical clinic of some description because they have a specialized need. I don't know. But my guess would be you probably are dealing with conflicting reports over number of passengers, number of crew. how many crew does it take to man one of these Lear jets? I don't know. Obviously, one anyway, the pilot. Is there a co-pilot? Is there one or two people? If there's a medical situation involved, if this is a Lear jet that regularly engages in transporting medical patients, do they have a nurse and a technician on board? Again, I don't know. I'm just tending to think there were 6 people. Although when I first saw the video, most will by now have seen the doorbell video cam of the plane coming down, and it strikes me, it looks like it's coming down at a 45-degree angle. There's a bright, what looks like to me a street lamp, and then it comes in at about a 45-degree angle, and then a massive fireball. And watching that, the first thing that came to mind is plane? A plane? How about a rocket or a missile? That was just my thinking, given the speed at which this, and remember, when I was first watching that doorbell cam footage, I was under the impression that the reporting was saying small plane. And when I hear small plane, I have in my head, I've been on a Cessna that seated 7 total. Pilot, co-pilot, 5 passengers. And that was, with 2 twin prop, 2 propellers, or maybe just 1. And that's what I think of a small plane. When I think of Lear jet, yeah, they're small, they don't hold a lot of people, okay, whatever the case. But it just shows you the degree to which in this world, and given the fact that so many people, myself certainly included, have lost pretty much total faith in the mainstream media, in our government officials, whether they be from the United States or Canada or Europe or anywhere else in the developed Western world, just because the news says it, I don't necessarily believe it. When you see me reach up like this, I'm just checking the chat to see if anything's being said. And so far, 968 is the only one. Normally, I do these a little later, but I was a little anxious to get on tonight, given the breaking nature of this news. And this is, when did that plane go down in D.C.? A couple nights ago, 3 nights ago, 2-3 days ago, when that crash happened in Washington, D.C. at Reagan National Airport between the Black Hawk and this regional jet that, so 57 people, I think it is, people killed, or 67, 67, I think is the number. I believe 60 passengers, 4 crew on the regional jet, and then 3 military members on the Black Hawk helicopter, 67 total people killed. We're still processing that, still dealing with all the news fallout from that. And now, bam, we have another plane crash, this time apparently a Lear Jet 55. And it's reminding me somewhat of, and I can't remember whether it was a year or 2 years ago, sometime within that time frame, when there were all these fires happening at food plants, and it happened one after another, and it was always seemed to be fires happening at food plants. Then I guess it was last year that there were a number of wildfires in Canada. We had fire in Nova Scotia. We had fires in Quebec, fires in Ontario, fires in Western Canada. And it was just one after another, all in the same area. And now we've had one plane crash, another plane crash. And more recently, I've got Sioja Malik is here, back again. Thank you for showing up again. I appreciate it. I enjoyed our conversation. I wanted to speak to some of the things we were talking about yesterday, because going through it again, I got a better sense of where you're coming from. When we talked about the Bible, and it strikes me from what you had written that you're not. I believe this, but that doesn't mean it's true. And you have concluded, I gather, that this is a lot of it or all of it is false. And we can get on to that later. But then Sioja Malik writes, I didn't watch it, but someone was conveying there has been a recent plane crash. Yes. And that's what I've been talking about for the last 10 minutes, for most of it. Before I have a dog here, Candy the Wonder Dog. And I start out my videos, the first minute or two is me just horsing around with her and giving her a TREAT. I have to spell it. If I even as soon as I spelled the word, she looks up, do I get another one? And CO Jamalik is writing 6 recent plane crashes. Yeah, there was one out in California, I think, a small plane crashed into a business of some description. There seems to be, this is what I'm talking about. We had all those food plant fires happened 3 years ago. And then we had all the Canadian wildfires last year all across the country. Now it's plane crashes, and it's reminding me somewhat of, and I can't remember what year, maybe 2022, 2023, the World Economic, the G20, that is to say, the 20 largest economies in the world, were meeting in Bali, Indonesia. And there was a parallel conference to the G20. The G20 is government finance ministers, prime ministers, presidents, etc. It's a governmental meeting, G20. And there was a parallel summit going on at the same time in Bali. And that was populated by corporate business types. And Klaus Schwab, founder and president of the World Economic Forum, was addressing that parallel conference. And at that parallel conference, he said that the world in the months and years to come can expect more quote unquote black swan events. And the only time I had heard reference to black swan events was on Wall Street in the capital markets, when a company reports bad news. That is called a black swan event. A white swan event is the opposite. Would kind of get us into the whole racism talk again. Why is the good event a white swan event? Why is the bad event a black swan event? But that's the way that terminology has been around for, I don't know how long, probably 100 years or more. And maybe it is wrong. CO Jamalik knows the lingo. Thank you. Good. I don't like to assume. That people have specific knowledge about one thing or another. There's a lot of times I learn. A lot of times I use in the past, I've used words wrongly because I had a misconceived notion about what a word meant. I'll give you a quick example. Pithy, Pithy. I used to think that the word pithy meant of no significance, worthless, no depth to it. And I used it in conversation quite frequently. I'd go, well, that's a pithy little statement, meaning, light, no real depth, not much meaning to it. And then someone confronted me on it and said, why are you saying that? It's not a deep statement. And I said, yeah, that's why I said it's not deep, it's pithy. And they go, yeah, but pithy means deep and substantive. I went, no, it doesn't. Turned out I had been using the word pithy wrong for years. For probably 20, 30 years, I've been using this word pithy and using it in completely the opposite way to what the word actually means. We all get things wrong is the point I'm getting at. Anyway, so when this plane crash went down in Philadelphia, northeast Philadelphia, I was thinking missile, rocket, maybe a drone, the way it plowed into the ground, and the massive fireball that resulted. It just seemed disproportionate to what a simple plane crash would produce. However, obviously, in the case of a plane crash, it depends what is the plane crashing into. If they crash into cars or a truck, a tanker truck carrying flammable material like gas or chemicals or goodness knows what, hey, stuff can happen. Now all of a sudden, I just remembered that incident that happened a couple of years ago in East Palestine, Ohio, where that train derailed. and vinyl chloride was spewed in a massive cloud in the air. And goodness knows this world is getting crazier and crazier and crazier. Let me see if anything more is being written. Fill up the live chat. I appreciate CEO Jamalik being here again. I hope I'm pronouncing your name reasonably well. I like to pronounce people's names properly and do the best I can. But there's so many things happening right now. We have the plane crash over the Potomac in Washington, D.C. Then we have these Senate confirmation hearings going on. Gabbard, Patel, Kennedy, that's occupying the news loop. If you're an American, you may not be aware that in my native Canada, the largest province, Canada's population is in and around 40 million people. We're about the size of California, roughly. And so Ontario, the province of Ontario, is having an election. Just to give that some scope, we're about 17, 18 million. We're close to half of the population of Canada resides in this province where I live, Ontario. So we have an election in Ontario coming up, where the Liberal Party is right now picking a new prime minister for us. Americans watching this may not understand the Canadian political process that well. A lot of Canadians don't. But what is happening is Justin Trudeau, as many will know, has signaled that he is going to resign the leadership of the Liberal Party, and with that, he resigns from being prime minister. But before he does that, the Liberal Party has to conduct a leadership race. So Liberal Party members are right now in the process of deciding who they want to replace Trudeau with. And the two principal candidates are Mark Carney, who's a former governor of the Bank of Canada, which the equivalent of the Fed in the US. Then he left that job to become the governor of the Bank of England. And then he left that to be a financial advisor at the UN with a primary focus on selling the whole climate change narrative. CEO Jamalik says Canada's primaries. It's not really a primary, because in primaries, the U.S. system of primaries to determine who the candidates are, completely different than what we have here in Canada. This is only for card-carrying members of the Liberal Party. They will vote for the leader, and then that leader, Trudeau steps down, and that whoever they chose. There's about 400,000 card-carrying members of the Liberal Party, and you can be a member at 14 years of age and cast a vote. And whoever they choose then automatically becomes the Canada's prime minister. So we will have a prime minister who was not voted on in a general election. And this has happened to us Canadians. It's happened to Canadians before. It happened back in the early 1990s. In the 90s, we had a prime minister by the name of Brian Mulroney. He was leading a majority government. He resigned his seat. They had a leadership convention. The Conservatives chose Kim Campbell. She became Prime Minister of Canada for a few months. Then there was a general election, and her government was defeated. They were wiped out. Then later, before that, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, in the 1980s, he resigned the leadership of the Liberal Party while the Liberal Party was ruling. He was the prime minister. They had a leadership convention. They chose John Turner, and John Turner got to be prime minister for a month or two or three. And then an election was called, and the Liberals were replaced by the Conservatives. A little bit of a civics lesson on Canadian, what they call the Westminster parliamentary system of democracy. Our prime minister is almost akin to the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Our House of Commons is like the American House of Representatives. You have a Senate down in the US that is elected. We have a Senate that is appointed. individuals get appointed by the prime minister, whoever it is at whoever the prime minister is at the time. When vacancies come up in the Senate, the prime minister appoints the person and they can serve until the age of 75. It used to be for life. And then in the US, your laws do not become law. Something passes through the House of Representatives, it passes the Senate, then it goes to the president, and the president has to put pen to paper, then it's a law. In Canada, it goes through our House of Commons. If it gets passed there, it goes to the Senate. If it gets passed there, then it goes to the Governor General, who is the representative of the King, King Charles, because we're a constitutional monarchy. And when the Governor General puts pen to paper and signs it, that is referred to as royal assent, and then that becomes law. And that's more or less a ceremonial function. It's part of our Constitution. We're a constitutional monarchy. The head of the government is actually, in point of fact, ultimately the crown, the king. And the Governor General serves as the King's representative in Canada, in Ottawa, and they get to sign on the King Chuck's behalf. So again, a bit of a civic lesson between the differences between Canadian and American politics. I actually, in many ways, prefer your system. I like the structure of American government. The one thing I don't like about the American system is the fact that each state conducts the voting in federal elections their own way. You're electing a president for the country, and yet Alabama has one system of voting, New York has another, California another, the Dakotas another, the Carolinas another. Some use touchscreen voting, some use paper ballots, some use a machine where you pull a lever, some you scan your ballot in. It's different in all, every state has its own electoral commission that oversees an election. There's nothing national. There's no national standard. It's each individual state. The US does get complicated in that regard because of state rights. And there's that's an ongoing battle constantly between, what are state rights versus federal rights. And I don't want to make my channel, I don't want to turn my channel into a civics course and I'm sure there are minor points that I get wrong, but in grand scopes, I've got a pretty decent understanding of the political frameworks of both Canada and the US. But man, oh man. It's going to be interesting to see because we're living through a period, and I mentioned how Klaus Schwab said, as we are in this transitional phase of the Great Reset and embarking on the fourth industrial revolution, the world can expect many more cataclysmic events, and that is what we are seeing unfold. These so-called black swan events. I didn't even mention the fact that now the price of eggs has gone through the roof because what's happening all over the United States. I haven't heard so much about it in Canada, but it's affecting prices here too, is that bird flu cases are on the rise. But I mean, typically what it is you have a poultry farmer, a large factory farm, that has thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of chickens, and one or two or three or four or a dozen, whatever, a small number, and I think it's even just one or two, tests positive for bird flu using this polymer chain reaction, PCR test, which is incredibly, using it as a diagnostic tool. The guy who invented it said you should never use this as a diagnostic tool in of itself, but that's the way it's used. He's dead now, conveniently, the guy who invented it. I think he won a Nobel Prize. And he had said, don't use this in of itself as a diagnostic tool. It's not the smoking gun. It can be, he suggested it could be part of a diagnosis wherein a patient, an individual comes in presenting certain symptoms and you're wondering, is it RSV, flu, COVID, Marburg, who knows? Or, their diagnosis is not an exact science by any stretch of the imagination because the symptomology of all those, diseases is similar. So what happens is, you might do, so you check the symptoms. You might do, I guess, blood testing, your analysis, and throw into the mix a PCR test and use that as part of a diagnosis. But rather, what's been done since the COVID era is, oh, you tested positive on the PCR, bang, that is COVID definitively. And then, if you're an 85-year-old living out your last days in a long-term care facility, hoping to have a few more months of diaper changes, and, are on 10 medications and cardiovascular disease, dementia, Alzheimer's, you don't know what day of the week it is. Then if that person who tested positive, well, if they die, which is no big surprise when you got someone in a long-term care facility, talk to people who work in nursing homes, hospice, long-term care. And if it's a facility with 100, 200, 300 beds, people are dying every single day, as a matter of course. But now they're all COVID deaths. So you get to boost the COVID numbers. Dun, 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 I always talk about how in Canada, there was a nursing home up in Bobcaygeon, Ontario, northern Ontario. CJ O'Malley works in a long-term care facility. So could you corroborate what I'm saying? I mean, how many beds are in the facility? And do you see deaths every day? One of my best friends, his mother worked in a long-term care facility. I know other individuals who work as PCWs, personal care workers in long-term care facilities, and that's the experience they've related to me. I myself do not work in a long-term care facility, but I have been in them because both my grandparents were in long-term care facilities, and that was the norm. People die if it's 100 plus beds. You got people dying every single day. The simple fact of the matter is, before COVID came along in my home province of Ontario, 300 people in Ontario were dying every single day. Normally, that's just, people die. And I missed your comment from before that, CO Jamalik. It could never make it out of trials until COVID for vaccines, and it was pushed through. No kidding. Pushed through, I think, is being kind. Rammed through a few short months. And CO Jamalik is writing that, can you tell me if you're male or female? And here's Wayne Norman is back, Esquire. I wish I could see your picture better. And likewise with you, CO Jamalik. I just would like to know, CO Jamalik, if you could tell me if you're male or female, as I like to say what she is writing or what he is writing. Thank you, CO. It is a she. I kind of got that inference, but your picture on my tablet here, very small. I can't quite make it out. With a name like Wayne, that's easier. So she's saying about the LTC that it's a small facility and we don't see deaths every day. I have one resident that has been here off and on since maybe 2004 or 2005. So, when we talk about long-term care, there are different levels of it. I had a great aunt, that aunt I mentioned before, who was born in 1901. She kept her apartment going, living independently until she was 89. And then she went into what I will call, it was senior living, but it was a place that had levels. When she moved in, she was in the independent living wing. And so she had full, no restrictions, come and go as you please. She didn't have a kitchen. That was one point. She didn't have a kitchen. She would go down to the dining room where they prepared the meals. But she had her own bathroom and a sitting room and her bedroom. And but then they would have, so you would go from the independent living wing, then to the assisted care wing, where you'd have people like PSWs, perhaps helping you dress, bathe, whatever, as needed. the activities of daily living. And then from there, you would move into the care. You would be in care. It's no longer assisted, it's care. And when I talk about long-term care, it's, these are the facilities people move into and do not move out of. In my home province of Ontario, there's something called the Long-Term Care Association of Ontario. They have a website. I've looked over their statistics, and it's something in the neighborhood, I think, as I recall, 86%, the overwhelming majority of residents are suffering from some form of cognitive decline, dementia, or Alzheimer's, or both, and need extensive help with these activities of daily living, the so-called ADLs, activities of daily living, and that would be bathing, feeding, dressing, toileting. And it says right on their website in publishing these statistics that 86% of residents need extensive help with the activities of daily living. Extensive, not just a little help, extensive. And that roughly 75% were already suffering from circulatory and cardiovascular type diseases, conditions, that somewhere around 40 to 50% were taking 10 or more prescription medications. That's a long-term care facility in Ontario. And it's worth noting, Washington Post reported on the fact that Canada's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Theresa Tam, said 80% of the deaths being listed as COVID deaths were happening in long-term care. And I openly question, to what degree did COVID play a role? Did it shorten their life significantly by a day or two, by a week, by a month, by a year? You're talking about an incredibly frail, sick population. If a simple RSV or a simple strep, if anything gets into a long-term care, because the population, they're almost like, to use the wildfire analogy, these people are the dry timber. Just, any little spark tears through them. I mean, that's not the kindest way to put it, perhaps, but sometimes, to convey things, sometimes blunt language is the best. We pussyfoot around so much that it makes life difficult. So let me see what's being written. So nothing new in the live chat yet. I wanted to get on to some points that, seeing as both Wayne and Sioja Malik are here and they were on last night, and we were talking about DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and about racism in general and hiring practices and all the rest. And that video has gotten hundreds of views, which is abnormal for my, again, miserable, pathetic little YouTube station. But I do, of course, like it. I get that little endorphin. I think it's dopamine, a little drug in the brain that goes, oh, wow, people are watching me. I'm important. Da, da, da. I like to be aware of it, because I think being aware of it helps diminish the impact and kind of keeps your feet on the ground, so to speak. Wayne's writing, LOL. At any rate, I had a thought, and might come across as a bit shocking, speaking as a man who, as I mentioned yesterday, I'm the father of 3 biracial kids. But I'm going to admit something right now. I am prejudiced. I am prejudiced, absolutely 100%. Now, I make a distinction, and this I came by this definition, if you will, organically. Prejudice, prejudge. That's where it comes from, to prejudge, to have a preconceived notion, preconceived idea. And I think everyone is prejudiced. We tell jokes that are based on stereotypes, and 99% of the population will get the joke because we understand the stereotype and we have that prejudgment built into us. I differentiate prejudice from racism because, in my view, this is my definition. I'm not saying it's universal or perfect, but in my view, Racism is when someone acts on prejudice. We all have prejudice, but if you act on it, then that manifests itself as quote unquote racism. Again, my definition. But one of the aspects, one of the ways in which I am prejudiced, and I've had to think about this a lot, and I was thinking about it more, but I've thought about it before. I've thought about it it's been on my mind for a while, not just months, for years. And it's the fact that I find I have a large affinity with individuals who are Black. And by affinity, I mean I find myself attracted psychologically to them, to individuals who are Black. I've mentioned before that I work in a retail establishment, and when a customer comes in, if they're Black, I'm very anxious to engage with them. Because number one, I find typically, and this is not universal, this is part of my prejudice, but so often I find that Black individuals are so much more outgoing, engaging, friendly. I find white individuals like myself can be uptight and very judgmental. And that's not to say that there aren't Blacks who aren't uptight and aren't judgmental. There are. But I was thinking about it after last night's video with respect to how I define myself, how I've always grown up having been the outsider. I was born in Canada, moved to New York City, then to New Jersey, and basically, I was a New York, New Jersey kid up until grade 9, or not grade 9, but the age of 9 when I was in grade 4, and we moved back to Canada, although I really had no concept of Canada because I'd been up on vacations visiting grandma and stuff like that. But I at my core, I had an American view on things. But then we moved back to Canada, and I was in the middle of grade 4, finished grade 4, did all of grade 5, and I was the outsider. And then after living in Burlington, Ontario, we moved to Portland, Oregon. And after having been in Canada for a year and a half, I'd adopted a Canadian accent, Canadian mannerisms, ways of speech. And now I was the outsider again in Oregon. And then we moved to Pickering when I was 12, Pickering, Ontario, Canada, just outside of Toronto. And again, I'm the outsider. And it became part of my DNA. And I've become quite comfortable being someone who's on the outside. And having an outsider's look upon things, someone who's I'm not in the in crowd. I'm not with the popular people. And one thing I failed to mention is that later in life, 2011 until 2015. In 2011, I moved to Quebec City. And if you don't know, Quebec is totally French. 99% of the population speaks French as their first language, and a large chunk of the population does not have any facility in the English language whatsoever. Il faut parler français presque tout le temps. You have to speak French pretty much all the time, unless you're within the confines of an English-speaking household. My wife, unfortunately, never really got very proficient at French, but I was in the Army. I was at Valcartier, which is 5th Mechanized Brigade Group, one of the 3 main Army bases in Canada, Valcartier, Petawawa, and Edmonton. Those are the 3. And typically speaking, it's French people are assigned to Valcartier, English to Petawawa and Edmonton. But I already had some facility in French. I was decent, but I had never been immersed living, totally in French like that. I had taken summer French immersion courses when I was in my teenage years, but that, would be 6 weeks. This was all the time. And I was working in French I was the only English guy in my unit. I was le seul tête carrée. That's what they call Anglos in Quebec. They call us tête carrée, square heads, because we're blockheads. We're not hip. We're not cool. And so again, I was the outsider. I'm not hip. I'm not cool. I'm not part of the in crowd. And so bringing it back, the reason I think I have an affinity and I feel drawn towards Black individuals, whether American or Canadian, but often really Americans too, like Americans more so than Canadians, is because I think it's part of the experience of growing up Black in Canada. And I don't know because I'm not. So this is just speculation on my part. Is that Blacks have a tendency to not be as trusting of authority figures. And I think those in the quote unquote white community would do well to pay attention to our Black brothers and sisters, if I can use that term, because I'll use an example. During the COVID era, Black Americans were far less likely to roll up their sleeves for a certain intervention than were white Americans. As a matter of fact, Hank Aaron famously knowing that a lot of Black Americans have distrust of anything, any government programs. I've spoken on this channel before about the infamous Tuskegee experiment down in Tuskegee, Alabama. So Black Americans have a certain, intelligent distrust. You better prove yourself to me. And we're very reticent. And so Hank Aaron wanted to calm those concerns. So he got his COVID vaccine publicly. And then, wasn't shortly thereafter, he tragically passed away. Not going to say anything on that because I don't want to get in trouble with the overlords at YouTube. So that's something I wanted to mention. Is correcting my pronunciation of Tuskegee. She is saying Tuskegee. I hope, is that better? I've probably heard it said, but just because I've heard someone say it doesn't mean that they're necessarily saying it right. But most often I interact with it reading. I've read a fair bit on it, disgusting what happened. People talk about the fact that what happened in Germany in the 1930s and 40s, and they can say, well, that kind of thing could never happen in the modern era. It couldn't happen in a free and democratic society like America. Well, that Tuskegee experiment ran for 40 years, from the 30s until the 1970s. And I'm not sure if individuals were actually infected with syphilis, but I know that the goal of the study was to track the progression of people infected with syphilis and giving them no treatment. So if we do nothing to treat these individuals, to mitigate their pain and suffering, if we do nothing, how does the disease progress? That was the Mengele type experiment that was conducted by US government medical officials for 40 years. And it was done in a predominantly Black area. I think all the participants were Black, rural, poor, poorly educated. I've read that the euphemism, the expression in that area at that time, when someone would get sick, the individual would say, I got some bad blood, or you got some, if someone was sick, they'd say, you got some bad blood. I can't do a Southern American accent. Well, I can do a Southerner, but I can't do a Southern Black American accent. I'm not going to try. But at any rate, what they promoted their study, they said that they were coming down to offer free medical treatment for people with bad blood. And that's how they sold it. Wayne's writing a few things. He wrote all of us are, and that he agrees. I'm assuming you're agreeing with my points about how, I remember I was down in Virginia Beach with my eldest, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Hampton Roads, Virginia area. And I'm a smoker, and I would go outside the Comfort Inn that we were staying in. My big guy was playing in a basketball tournament down there. I think Allen Iverson is from the area, and so I'd go down to have a dart, hack a dart. That's what we used to say in the forces. And I'd go hack a dart, and I'd go down to hack a dart, and there would be other individuals down there, and I'm a talker. I engage with everyone. If I see someone, I'll start engaging in conversation about the weather. Hey, how you doing? What's up? I just enjoy conversation. It's part of my makeup. And I would be down there, and I noticed that when I talked to individuals who were Black, there seemed to be a bit of a wall up. There seemed to be a reticence there. You know, who's this? And I'm going to use a term, and I'm not sure I'm using it right because I'm a Canadian, really. I mean, I've lived in Canada permanently since grade 7, since I was 12 years of age. So my sensibilities, I still remember my time growing up in the US, and it does help give me a different way of looking at things, but I was only 12. So but the way I had it in my head that they're going, who is this cracker? What does he want? What does this cracker want? I never really understood that term cracker, where it comes from, but from what I understand, it's a negative term for a white person in the Black community, whatever. And so, and it just seemed there was this, what's your game? What are you up to? And, I'd have typical conversation. You're at a hotel. So I say, where are y'all visiting from? Throwing a little Southern American y'all, where are y'all from? And there were a lot of the people there from the Carolinas who would come up for whatever reason. And then they would, of course, throw it back. And, well, what about yourself? Where are you from? You sound like you're from North. And I go, yeah, I'm from Canada. I'm from a little town called Brighton. Oh, you're Canadian. And then I noticed the wall went down. Oh, you're Canadian. You're not an American. Okay, I can talk to you. And it was just something interesting. I don't have a lot to say on it. Just that this racial divide that exists in the U.S. is so unnecessary, and it's so counterproductive. Because, as I was saying, this is my own personal opinion, is that Black Americans, and this is why I think when I was mentioning my friend Dave, who's down from Indianapolis, and how we got on like a ball of fire. And I think it's because we both have a natural inborn distrust, or at least a questioning, the ability to question authority and the ability to question the narrative. And, here's the way it is. Well, and I think when you're Black, especially a Black American, there's tendency to say, you don't know, you say you have my best interest in heart? Sure you do. Yeah, I was born at night, but I wasn't born last night. So, I'm going to read what's being written. I've got C.O. Jamalik writing, I learned early in nursing school there were 2 Black American and 1 Jamaican descent nursing students in a class of about 95. I was surprised how many of the white students were helpful. Good. And that this lowered her level of prejudging. Because, the big, and I wanted to mention something, a documentary I had seen, and I said, I'll talk about it. And then I never got back to it. I do that all the time. So let me write it down. Think tank. I don't know what to call it, but that'll remind me of what I wanted to cover off. Wayne is writing, and I assume C.O.J. Malik and Wayne, and not that it matters. Well, it does to the extent that it affects our frame of reference. I'm assuming you're both Black Americans. Anyway, Wayne Norman's writing, I'm trained to prejudge information, meaning emotions, etc., but that kind carries over to individuals, okay? And leads to, and then he writes, distrust leads to distrust. And he further writes, you would be too if you were, quote unquote, us. I think it was, I forget One of you wrote yesterday about the Stanford experiment, where they treated white Americans as if they were black, and the Americans, the white Americans, didn't like it. Duh, no kidding. With respect to Tuskegee, Wayne is saying they weren't poor or uneducated. They trusted a black woman who advertised the BS. I hadn't read it that way, but as with anything, there can be different perspectives on things, different information. And, it may not have been a one size fits all. And they might have approached people in different ways. Anyway, and that shows you right there that I have something of a prejudiced, pejorative view about the southern U.S., Alabama, and black communities in a place like that in the 1930s, when that quote unquote experiment started. I default back to a movie like the To Kill a Mockingbird, Harper Lee's famous novel, with the movie starring Gregory Peck, and the way they depict the black community, and that's a pejorative, media-driven image that kind of gets cemented, and you have to be ready to challenge these things. Wayne's laughing about, we can tell something about something. The problem is I don't see these necessarily as they come up, so I don't know what you're reacting to, but it's all good. And he's saying it's called distrust. And it comes from the crack of the whip from slave masters. Yeah. But at the same time, I was talking in my video yesterday about the story of Joseph being in Egypt and naming his child Manasseh, and saying, I've forgotten all the troubles of my father's house, and how we kind of need a spirit of Manasseh in the world today, because so many people are finding it difficult to move forward, finding it difficult to navigate this world because, they can't let go of the past. You don't understand. I have trust issues. I've been hurt. And the sad part about that is that people start to wrap their identity around things that are very negative emotions like hurt, mistrust, abuse, and that becomes part of their being, and they don't want to let go of it. It's become part of their identity. I'm the survivor of abuse. And that has the capacity to be debilitating. Now, it should be noted, of course, when Joseph said, I've forgotten all the troubles of my father's house, or however exactly it was rendered, I let that go. When he said that doesn't, he let go of it. He stopped letting it define him. But that doesn't mean he had forgotten. He hadn't forgotten his father. He hadn't forgotten his brothers, the ones who sold him into slavery. Because later, they come. The brothers come because there's famine and they need food, and Egypt has it because Joseph has done a great job of storing up food from the 7 years of plenty. And when the 7 years of famine come, they come knocking, and Joseph has not forgotten. And when he finally reveals himself, he says, it's me, it's your brother, the one you sold into slavery. Is my dad still alive? His dad's still alive. He didn't forget. He let it go. Talk about forgiveness. Joseph forgave his brothers. Joseph said to his brothers, you did it for evil. What you did was for evil, but God used it for good. And there's some gospel good news here, because we want to be defined, not everyone, but I've been guilty of this myself. So often when I go into scripture, and there's deep meaning in these stories beyond, as I said yesterday, beyond just the shallow literal, you know, millimeter thick analysis that comes from literal interpretation. There's deep meaning to this. And when I tell these stories, often I'm preaching to myself, because I have as much capacity as anyone to be defined by the hardships and troubles I've had in my life. I have bemoaned, complained about the fact that I grew up as something of a nomad. Less than a year old, moved from Ontario to New York City. 3 years old, moved. We spent a few months back in Canada when I was 3. And then my dad got, they wanted him back in New York. And so we moved to New Jersey, because my dad demanded more money if they wanted him to go back to New York, because he didn't like living on Staten Island. So we were able to afford to live in a nice part of northern New Jersey, Bergen County. And I went through kindergarten we lived in Wyckoff, New Jersey when I was in kindergarten. So I had my friends, my kindergarten friends, David Hirschberger, still remember him. But then we moved a town over from Wyckoff, New Jersey to Glen Rock, New Jersey. And so I was, instead of being with my kindergarten friends, now I had a new friend. I had to make new friends. And I did grade 1, 2, 3, and I was in grade 4 when we moved to Burlington, Ontario. So I went to one school for kindergarten, one school for grades 1, 2, 3, 4. And then in grade 4, I finished grade 4 and did all of grade 5 at another school. And then we moved to Portland, Oregon. And I went to another school out in Portland for grade 6. Then I came to another school in Canada for grades 7 and 8. So in my first 8 years of schooling, I went to 5 different schools. And I've complained about this. And so, well, if that hadn't happened, I'd be, things would be so much better for me. I'd be more trusting, more secure. I'd be able to, I have difficulty making deep, lasting friendships, because it's built into my DNA. And I need to, as much as I preach it, I've got to preach it to myself. I got to let that go. And I should embrace the fact that it is because of this nomadic experience and this, so that and this differing perspective that I had when something like the COVID era came along, I was able to look at it critically and realize that a lot of the stuff that they are saying here, a ton of it does not make sense. There's a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of propaganda. There's hyperbole on steroids, the deadly coronavirus and everything. And I was able to see it. Would I have been able to see it if I'd had a different, more stable life experience growing up? And my dad wasn't moving us around for evil, but he was concerned with advancing his career. And if my dad was less concerned with advancing his career and more concerned with providing a stable environment for someone like me, But Joseph, as he said to his brothers, Joseph said, "You did it for evil, but God used it for good." Might say, my dad used it to advance his career, but God used it for my good, because it enabled me to view the world in a different manner. Gave me a wider range of perspective, and to not be so blind and accepting of everything that's just handed to me. And so maybe Black Americans who are distrustful of authority and everything because of this horrible history can say, yeah, white America, you meant it for evil, but God used it for good, because he's given you the capacity to realize, to be more critical, to be more analytical and more critical thinking, and less naive and less trusting when evil, nefarious plots are foisted upon you and everyone. That's a bit of an epistle. Sorry about that. I've got C.O. Jamalik writing, basic civility is extended to all. Trust, not so much. Civility should be I like what you wrote there, Jamalik, about how, civility, we need to be civil with each other, of course, but trust, that has to be earned. Wayne lives down in Memphis, Tennessee. home of the blues. Oh, yes, the Memphis Blues music. When you're in the States, come to Memphis and contact me. We'll have a great time. I'm sure we would. When growing up in the United States, when growing up in New Jersey, I fell in love as a kid. My childhood hero was none other than Davy Crockett, born on a mountaintop in Tennessee, greatest state in the land of the free. Raised in the woods, so he knew every tree, killed him a bar when he was only 3. I loved the frontier. And we don't think of Tennessee as being west now, but I got my globe over here. Where's Tennessee? I know where it is, but that was the western. That was the frontier. At any rate, C.O. Jamalik is writing, one black person is used as a reflection of all black. Yeah, you can't use of all black people. We don't use one white person as a reflection of all white people. And this is why I was saying how I find I have a natural affinity when I'm at work and I see someone who comes in and they're black. I want to get into conversation with them because I find invariably, not 100%, but invariably we get on well. And most of the black Canadians tend to be people who emigrated or are the children of immigrants from the Caribbean, from Jamaica. A lot of Jamaicans, a lot of Trinidadians. And it's because Canada, starting in the 60s and into the 70s, we as a nation liberalized our immigration policies, opened things up more, in particular for people coming from other Commonwealth countries that were part of the British Commonwealth, like Jamaica, like Trinidad and Tobago. Anyway. Something about it. In terms of the Tuskegee experiment, I'm thinking she's writing, it was mostly prisoners, inmates, people in prisons. Okay, and Wayne's giving me the etymology on the word cracker. It comes from the cracking of the whip from the slave masters. Okay. And don't worry, don't apologize for anything. This, live video chat thing has its challenges. He's writing simultaneously as I speak, and now I realize unless I define what I'm saying, no worries. C.O. Jamalik is saying that something is ever present when you have to train my sons, Corey, Jamal, and Malik, how to interact when they are stopped by police, when they enter. Oh my God. And I cannot fathom that. That guy, I don't know his name and I don't want to remember it. The guy who, Tayshaun Prince, was this the kid down in Florida who was simply walking through a predominantly white area? I think he was wearing a hoodie. Heck, I have one. And this guy basically tracked him. And that was so, man, oh man, oh man. And this is why these discussions are needed. Open-minded, good-hearted, assuming the best, not automatically assuming the worst in people. We have different political viewpoints. I watched, and I would invite you to watch it as well. There's a church in Thousand Oaks, California. It's pastored by a man named Rob McCoy. And the reason I know about this church is they refused to obey by the government draconian measures about, all the shutdown and everything. They stayed open. And so it's because of that I started to follow them online. And then I saw Rob McCoy, the pastor. He invited a gentleman by the name of Bishop Huggins, who he called, quote unquote, Brother Love. Bishop Huggins, evangelical black Christian pastor. and had him on. And this bishop, his son, had been shot down by California State Police, or by California police. I don't know, the state police, Oakland police, whatever police. He'd been gunned down. And so he had a certain, and he was also a lifelong Democrat. And so that's one side of the discussion. On the other side was, many will be familiar with the Tatum, Officer Tatum, I think is his name. This was a guy who had been a football star at Arizona State University. And then after not making it as a professional football player, had gone to work for the Arizona State Police. So he had a law enforcement background. And has kind of a Candace Owens take on the world. And these two individuals from diametrically differing viewpoints, they sat down with Rob McCoy somewhat as the moderator between the two, and they had a very heartfelt, respectful discussion. And I found it very informative. So anyway, you can check it out. It's called Calvary Godspeak Calvary Chapel in Thousand Oaks, California, and it's on here on YouTube. Now I have Sio Jamalik writing, I even trained my 12-year-old daughter to remain silent if the school police question her. And Sio Jamalik is quoting one of my favorite, George Carlin, brilliant comedian. The man was a genius in my books. He was a wordsmith. George Carlin's, don't just teach your children to read, teach them to question and question everything. Absolutely. Loved Carlin because I found Carlin would trash the right wing and the left wing. He would trash both. And show how ridiculous things can be when you get out onto the extremes. And Wayne's saying, with respect to the way that Sio Jamalik is raising her children, he doesn't blame her, and I don't either. And I can't even begin. I can get a sense of it. I get a feeling of it, but you talk about, to understand a person, you need to walk around in their shoes. You got to see things from their perspective. That is incredibly difficult, incredibly hard to do for a white Canadian to understand what it is like growing up or living in, I don't know what part of the U.S. you're in, Jamalik. I know Wayne's from a large Southern American city, Memphis, Tennessee. Anyway, and Wayne, the Esquire, denoting the legal profession, he's in civil law, commercial and business litigation. And Wayne is sharing my feed. God love you. I appreciate it. I'm finding Canadians are starting to find their voice. For the longest time when I was growing up, Canadians, we were thought to be hockey players and cutters of wood, and I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay. That was the pejorative, negative view of Canadians. I remember watching an episode of MASH, and there was an interaction between the 477 and a Canadian unit, and they were like, hey, we'll call you if we need a hockey puck. Yeah. And now I'm finding Canadians, Jordan Peterson has certainly, I think, done a lot to elevate a massive intellectual who's now everywhere, selling out series, doing talks on, diving into scripture and using a psychological frame to, find deeper meanings to things. And he's done an enormous job of, I consider, rehabilitating scripture, because there's been a tendency, I think Sio Jamalik, if you will take this kindly, and I was a bit when I talked about it yesterday, I was a little straw-man-y a little ad hominem about people who degrade the Bible. And that's not a good way to be, because we've been programmed by the culture, by the media, to view anyone who looks at this book, to view it as, they're backward, they're ignorant, they're science denying, they're troglodytes. And because this is primitive, and this is, people used to sacrifice things, and there's deeper, more, there's incredible depth to the Bible. I mean, one of my favorite, and I'll probably wrap it up here because I'm at an hour and 10 minutes. And as I say, once I get to an hour, my voice starts to go. But the story of the book of Jonah, many will know it, and many will laugh at it. And they'll go, oh yeah, a whale or a big fish swallowed a guy and had him in its belly for 3 months. Like, you ever heard of stomach acid, man? And it's like, and I saw, and Jordan Peterson was doing an interaction with Bill Maher, and that was Bill Maher's kind of take on it. But I also saw Jordan Peterson talking about it during one of his speeches, and that the way he framed it. So, is that the depth of your analysis, the gastrointestinal workings of sea creatures? That's as far as you're going to go. And he unpacked it in an incredibly important way. I mean, basically what you have is Jonah is being given an injunction, call it his conscience, call it from the voice of the divine, to go to the enemy of the Israelite people, the Assyrians, the Ninevites, and to warn them that they're not living the way they should. They're not aiming up. They're lying. They're cheating. They're being bad. And this injunction is to go to the Ninevites and to tell them they're doing wrong, or that God will destroy you. And Jonah, the text doesn't tell us why Jonah refuses, but there's some good reasons we can surmise. Number one, the Assyrian Empire and the empire, or the Israel, kingdom of Israel, they've been at war for like generations. And so Jonah is like, wait a minute, you want me to go to the largest city, over 100,000 people, the city of our enemy, and you want me to go to them and say, hey, you guys aren't living the way you should? There are over 100,000 of them. There's one of me, and this is going to work out well. And on top of that, wait a minute, God, you're going to destroy them if they don't clean up? Good. We've been at war with them for decades. I have family members who have been killed in Assyrian conflicts. Go for it. Take them out. So there's two good reasons why Jonah would not be inclined to answer the call of the divine. And so what does Jonah do? Assyria is that way. Nineveh's that way. Jonah goes the other way. He gets on a boat sailing to Tarshish, gets on a ship in the Mediterranean Sea and says, see ya. And he goes the opposite direction from which the voice of God is calling him to go. And so what happens? And the way Peterson frames this, and I think there's a lot of utility in it, he says, when you hear the voice of God, when your conscience, when the divine calls on you to do something, you better do it. But so many of us don't. And I think most will recognize times in their life when they felt a compelling need to do something, but it was too hard. Or, I'm afraid to do it because of the consequences of what might happen if I do it. So go in the opposite direction like Jonah did. And Jonah gets onto a ship and he sails in the opposite direction, and he goes down into the hold of the ship and he falls asleep. And what happens is God throws a storm against the ship. And so immediately they go around, the captain of the boat goes around the ship and says, because we're living in at that time, it's a polytheistic world. Everyone's got different gods. Are you okay? And he's asking each passenger on the ship. Are you good with your God? Are you good with your God? What about you? And everyone seems to be good. And then they're like, what about that other strange guy with the weird beard? Oh, what about him? Oh, he's asleep. So he goes down to the hold of the ship. He wakes him and he says, yo, you sleeper, who are you? And are you right with your God? We're going to be destroyed here. There's a horrible storm. And Jonah gives it, to Jonah's credit, he gives it up. He goes, yeah, the reason this is happening is because of me. God gave me something to do and I got out of Dodge. I went the other way. And he said, get up on deck here, help us out. And they start throwing everything overboard to try and lighten the load of the ship and to save their lives. But it doesn't work. And Jonah, to his credit, he says, look, if you want the storm to abate, if you want to save yourselves, throw me overboard. But they don't want to do it. They're good men. They're like, no. And they keep trying to throw stuff over, but eventually they realize we're going to have to listen to this Jonah guy. They say, are you right with your God? And he goes, no, I'm an Israelite. I worship the God Most High, the God who created all, the master of the heaven and earth. And that scares the crap out of them. So eventually they lay hands on them. And as they throw him into the sea, they say, let not the blood of this man be on our hands. And they cast him into the sea. And so unpack that. If you feel the voice of the divine, if you feel yourself strongly compelled to go in a certain direction, and if you don't just risk your whole life, you risk the whole ship. You could bring the whole ship down. That ship might be your family, it might be your company, it might be your nation, depends your station. But if you don't answer the call of the divine when you feel compelled, and I have felt that in my life, and I have done like Jonah and gone the other way. It was just too hard. I never heard this story. I wish I had. And so Jonah is thrown into the ocean. Immediately, the water's calm. And so you think things are bad, but no, this is the thing. As bad as things are, they can always get worse. And a sea creature. People joke about the fact that, a whale, it wasn't the Hebrew, ancient Hebrew, as what that book was written in, the book of Jonah. That language does not have a word for whale. Rather, the word they use is great fish, sea monster, sea creature. Throw whatever translation you want. Swallows up Jonah. And you think that's bad enough. But then it goes to the bottom, to the depths it takes him into the very depths of hell. And then Jonah prays, recognizing the error of his ways. And then we get the story of redemption. Sometimes we got to get right to the bottom before we can climb back out. These stories have they're archetypes. And they serve as a beacon to how we can conduct ourselves wisely in this world. Anyway, that's what I wanted to end with, and it just came to me now. I don't know how much of I make little notes, just little scrib points on a little Hilroy pad about things. I talked about the plane crash. Didn't really get into the whole DEI thing. It'll be interesting to see whether out of this plane crash in Pennsylvania, I'm wondering, are we going to see more of this stuff? Are we, we had all the food plants that were catching fire and being destroyed. We had a lot of cattle being killed and dying. At another point, we had all the wildfires in Canada, and I'm just wondering now, are we going to be seeing a lot of plane crashes in the U.S.? And one thing I got to get out there before I forget is, I didn't get back to that think tank thing, is that it strikes me that, we just had all this news about the drones over New Jersey and the northeastern United States, the tri-state area and around New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, I guess. Pennsylvania would certainly be part of that. Pennsylvania and New Jersey are close. Is there any connection between this drones and now all these aviation difficulties. I don't have an answer. Let me just read what's being written. Eat Me's writing about Trayon Martin. That was the name. That was the kid I was referencing down in Florida who was basically stalked by a guy who, if I'd been on that jury, I don't believe in the death penalty, but that guy would have been incarcerated for life. And he's got, Wayne has corrected me about this guy. It's Officer Tatum or whatever. Mike Groan, 12. Mega Drone, Mega Done FU. Not FU, but something up. And Wayne says that he has had several heated conversations with Officer Tatum. When I was on the Roland Martin show, he decided at the last minute not to debate. Interesting. Mike is talking about Billy Graham. And C.O. Jamalik is writing that it's not that she doesn't trust the Bible and religious texts. I just don't trust them that edited them. For what it is worth about the Bible, and this only came to light recently. There's a second century copy. Whenever we find old fragments of papyri, ancient texts that predate, say, the Council of Nicaea, which I think was in 325 AD, we find texts that predate that. And when we find them and we compare them to the translations we have now, we're reading the same Bible that they were reading in the second and, in the first and second or the second century. Remember, the Bible was not written. The texts were not written until 20, 30, maybe 40 years after Jesus went to the cross. And everything would be copied down by hand. I'll get into that more on my next video, but there's a tendency I find that people, they want to, I've got the secret knowledge, and you've been deceived, you've been fooled. And there is utility in that in some senses, but when it comes to this, I need to do a video on that specifically. And then, Wayne likes the fact that yesterday C.O. Jamalik and I were kind of going at it, but I appreciate very much C.O. Jamalik, and I felt bad because afterwards I rewatched. I played at double speed to get through it quickly. And I thought I was a little straw man-y and a little ad hominem, which I consider intellectually weak. When you engage in ad hominem and straw man type attacks, that's weak. That's a sign of intellectual weakness and cowardice. And I don't like being weak, and I don't like being cowardly. But I have to admit, there are times, what happens is we get triggered. We want to defend something. And so whatever, we just reach into our quiver, and whatever arrow comes out, even if it's ad hominem, even if it's a straw man, we pull it out and we fire. So any of that I engaged in yesterday, I apologize. Thank you for showing back up. C.O. Jamalik says, I will say Solomon had 700 wives or something, and they say he was wise. 700 wives is not wisdom. There's a problem, and there's a difficulty in that we have what are called, what's called literal fundamentalism. Those who believe that everything in the Bible has to be believed 100%. And I tend to gravitate towards that, but I don't like to go too far, because I find that's why we get people like Bill Maher saying, oh, really, a whale swallowed a guy, and they miss much deeper, more significant meaning. And so I don't like to lean too heavily on literalism, because the real meat is to be found by looking at things through a more nuanced lens, through more allegorical, to view these stories as archetypical, etc. Um, uh, and then, okay, Sierra Malik, we're going to go full blasphemy maybe at some point. If Abraham had kept his peen in Sarah, there would be peace in the Middle East now. Jews and Mamluk, talking about the fact that, Abraham was given Hagar, a maidservant, a slave woman of his wife, Sarai, and she bore unto him, Hagar bore Ishmael. And Muslims are typically, well, not typically, but often referred to as Ishmaelites. They're the Arab people, and the offspring of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are the Israelites. C.O. Jamalik writes, when there is conflict, it often involves sex, too many wives, and too many sets of kids. So much being written. Anyway, I wanted to get back to one last thing. What the heck, I've gone on for an hour and 26. I'll bring up one last thing that I saw many years ago, and it was centered in Oakland, California, and it was about a guy who was a consultant. And he would go into companies and try and reduce racial conflict. He would go into workplaces where you would have, a significant number of black employees, significant number of white employees. And they showed him standing in front of a whiteboard, funny, in front of the white employees. And this gentleman was black. And he said, what is the first, I'm going to paint a picture for you. He said, you got a young black teenage kid walking down the street. What's the first thing that comes to your mind? And he said, I'm going to get I'll get the elephant out of the room. I'm going to take care of it right now. Take care of it right now. And he wrote the N word on the board. He said, there, that one's done. And all the negative slurs came out. Lazy, criminal, any negative you can think, they all came out. And then he asked them, he said, now, do any of you people, does anyone here have a black individual in their circle that they know of that does not fit that description? And most of them raised their hand. And he said, and what do you say with respect to that individual? And it came out, the exception proves the rule. But then he went through the same exercise with the black employees and said, same type of situation, only with a white individual. What are what are the things that immediately come to mind? Cracker, uptight, anal, and all these negative terms were put up. And then again, he asked the same question. Do any of you know a white individual who doesn't fit this stereotype? And they all said, yeah, the exception that proves the rule. And the lesson at the end of the day is that you need to get to know people, I believe strongly, as individuals and as not part of a group. We have a tendency in our world to we're tribalistic, is kind of the default position of humanity. I'm proud Irish, I'm proud Italian, I'm a proud Black American, I'm a proud Black Canadian, I'm a proud this, a proud that. And really, at the end of the day, like I could say I'm a proud Irishman, because if you go back in my family history, we're from Dublin. I think it's Dublin or Belfast. I've never been, but I can do the accent. And I've also got Scotland on the other side, my mother's side. We got Scotland. I got Scotland and Ireland. So I get the two confused. I can kind of meld the two accents together. So, you don't know I must be on the border between Scotland and Ireland. Anyway, but who cares? I'm proud to be of Irish Scottish heritage. It's like saying I'm proud to be bald, or I'm proud to be 5'11" and a bit, or I'm proud to have blue eyes or brown eyes or green eyes. You didn't do anything. Be individual individuals, we should be proud of our accomplishments. I'm proud that I served in the Army. I'm proud that I joined the Canadian Armed Forces and, worked in the communications branch. That's something I did. It's got nothing to do with melanin content or anything else, or where my parents were from or my ancestry. We all, but at the same time, we have to understand where does this come from? Why are there so many who say, well, I'm a proud Irishman? Because my family, going back in my family history, this is my mother's side. My mother's mother, her name was Maley, Maley, but it was her father. I don't know how far back we're going. So that's my mom's mother's father, great-grandfather. He had emigrated to Canada from Ireland. And at the time, there was a prescription against hiring Irish. There were signs in businesses that said, Irish need not apply, because the Irish are nothing but a bunch of lying, thieving, drunken, you're horrible people. And so if that's what the culture is saying, that because of your ethnic grouping, because you're Irish, you're not a good person, to flip that on its head, to fight fire with fire, I'm proud to be Irish. It becomes you're fighting fire with fire, taking an eye for an eye. You want me to be ashamed of being Irish, or ashamed or feel inferior because I'm black or because I'm this or because I'm that? No, damn it, I'm proud of it. And what we should be proud of in my books, in my mind, and this is the way I believe Christ sees us. He doesn't see Irish Catholic, or Irish Catholic kind of go together sometimes. He doesn't see skin color. He doesn't see height. He doesn't, these things that we're proud of. You got people who are like, I'm 6'5". I'm everything in a bag of chips because I'm 6'5". Oh, you worked really hard at being 6'5"? You won something of a genetic lottery. Going to an NBA basketball court and your average height, maybe a little less. Anyway, I've rambled on way too much. Whale oil beef has shown up. It's a friend, it's a regular viewer from British Columbia, north of Washington State. And yeah, I started the video, whale oil, with the Philadelphia plane crash. A Learjet 55. I think probably we're going to find out that there were 2 crew, 2 passengers, and maybe a couple technicians transporting someone for some type of medical emergency from Philadelphia to Missouri. That'll be my guess. Anyway, I have rambled on forever, and I appreciate everyone coming on. Anyone wants to engage with me, I love the live chat. And as much as I love the live chat, I also like the comment section, but that doesn't get filled up very much. And I think the reason is because, people want to engage live. They want live interaction. But when I do get messages, I do my best. I try to always respond to them. Or at least give a reaction, but I like to respond, especially if it's a thought out comment, someone with something they want to say. And ultimately, we're living in a crazy upside down world. We're going to be, I will not be surprised in the least if we see more incidents involving airplanes. And I'm openly questioning whether the drone activity that was happening over New Jersey on the coast, if it had any bearing, if it had any, I don't know that we'll ever find out an answer. It's like 911. So many of the questions I have still haven't been answered, and I don't expect they ever will be. What hit the Pentagon? I've never seen a plane basically disappear like a bomb. Or that plane in Pennsylvania that just left a charred hole. What happened to the plane? Where's the wreckage? Same with the 2 planes at the Twin Towers, where normally planes crash, you see wreckage. You see a tail wing, it's a part of the nose, part of the landing gear. You see wreckage. 4 planes crash in one day in within just a few short hours of each other, and there's no wreckage anywhere. They basically disintegrated. And now that was 25 odd years ago. There's more coming. There's more coming. But if you abide in Christ, if you get into relationship with he who was there at the beginning when the world was made, you're going to be equipped. You're going to have the armor of God. You're going to be girded up. You're going to be able to discern and to have a hand upon you, guiding you. And you got to let go of the wheel. So I ask you to receive the words that I always end my videos with, words that were spoken by Aaron. Yesterday's video, I think I mistakenly said Abraham. I guess I had Abraham on the brain. It was Aaron. Moses received these words from God, gave them to Aaron. Aaron spoke them over the Israelites, who are God's chosen covenant people. And the blessing is this: the Lord bless and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Because ultimately we can have that peace, but we may have a valley to walk through. 23rd Psalm. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. We're not to live in a spirit of fear. We're to live in a spirit of joyful thanksgiving. Amen. God, thank you for this day. So we'll talk to you all, probably be a couple nights. So see if there's anything. Whale Oil is wanting to know when I'm going to get my computer taken care of. I just spoke to the tech shop today about my laptop. Next week, I'm going out to buy a new one. Unfortunately, it's pooched. I think that's the technical term, pooched, P-O-O-C-H-E-D. So next week, I will be going out to buy a new one, and it will be upgraded. And I've been thinking about the fact that my channel, maybe it's time for me to put some lipstick on the pig, for lack of a better expression. I do like the fact that, I do like dress down, but maybe I can dress things up a little bit and, maybe get my voice out there even more. I do think, I don't want to be arrogant, but at the same time, I don't want to engage in false modesty either. I think I'm a reasonably articulate person, and I do think I have worthwhile things to say. I do believe that I have something to contribute in this YouTube world, but it's a competitive space, and there are a lot of voices out there. And so there are certain things you have to engage in if you want to put your best foot forward and, maybe take things further. And so I might have to do that. I've got Eat Me from Montreal. She's writing that Shanksville, Pennsylvania, they claim the earth resorbed it. Sure, as if that makes any sense. I haven't heard that yet. I consumed everything I could up until I went live, up until about 9 o'clock. Up until about 9 o'clock, I was keeping up to date on everything that was happening with that story. So there's more. Thank you, COJ Malik. Thank you, Eat Me. Thank you, Wayne Norman. It's funny when you put that Esquire at the end. It's the only thing that sticks is the Esquire part. And then Eat Me has written at the end here, because they are notorious to tell you stuff that just to force you to buy a new one. Well, actually that computer was running, it was 6-7 years old. At least 6 or 7 years old. So, nothing lasts forever. And now you have this whole manufactured obsolescence or designed obsolescence. Things are designed to be obsolete. Getting 5-6 years out of a laptop is probably pretty darn good. So anyway, it's time. So we'll talk to you all again in a night or two. God bless. And again, everyone who chimed in and everyone who didn't chime in, thank you. You're welcome to hit the like, to subscribe, to share, and do all those wonderful things that YouTubers talk about. Good night now.